The conversation on UFOs, UAPs, and non-human intelligence has long been shaped by experience, speculation, and secrecy. What's missing is a coherent approach, one that separates data from interpretation and evidence from belief. Humanity now stands at a threshold. Encountering a non-human reality is not only a scientific mystery, it's a civilizational challenge. We must move beyond ideology and secrecy toward a science of contact, grounded in evidence, methods, and shared human values. The Human Institute is building that foundation. The Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series is the first public multidisciplinary forum dedicated to developing the scientific and ethical foundations for researching our human encounter with non-human intelligence. The series convenes leading scientists, philosophers, and field investigators to explore new approaches, methods, and emerging data and findings to ultimately generate breakthrough discoveries in non-human intelligent phenomena. These one-hour presentations bring forward serious work by serious people, charting a roadmap for a new science capable of understanding and managing the unknown responsibly before it manages us. We invite scholars, experiencers, and all who seek clarity to join us. It's time to rise above speculation and take a deliberate step toward a grounded, evidence-based response to the existence of non-human intelligence.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Reed Summers. I'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion in the Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series, an initiative of the Human Institute presented in partnership with UAP Med. Again, my name is Reed Summers, and I want to thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and examination of the potential existence, presence, and activity of a non-human intelligence in the world. The Investigating NHI series exists to bring the study of UAP and potential NHI out of the secrecy and shadows of speculation and into the light of rigorous public discourse. We're setting out to establish the scientific, research, and investigatory practices necessary to evaluate both presence, activity, and ultimately the intent of a potential non-human intelligence, as well as to lay the intellectual groundwork for what may become ultimately a new field of inquiry, the study of NHI. In recent years, both former and current US presidents have publicly acknowledged the legitimacy of investigating UAP and the broader possibility that extraterrestrial life may exist. And very recently, we have seen a current presidential directive issued calling for the release and review of government files related to UAP, UFO, and potential extraterrestrial or alien life. Regardless of what anyone's interpretation of these developments might be, I believe it does signal a shift. The subject is entering a more formal political and institutional phase of investigation. And that shift in phase requires a renewed scientific engagement on this issue. And that is exactly what today's panel is focused on. Today's panel is titled The New Science of Non-Human Intelligence. And our aim here is not to presuppose the existence of NHI, but to examine what a rigorous interdisciplinary science would require if such a possibility were to be evaluated responsibly. Here we'll be asking what conceptual frameworks might be missing, what instrumentations and field protocols must be developed, what evidentiary thresholds must be articulated before we can move claims of anomalies to final proof and discovery of a potential form of non-human life. Our focus today in this panel is to bring together three researchers working at distinct but complementary edges of this problem, with work spanning astronomical data analysis, real-time field instrumentation, and materials and biophysical research. We'll be exploring what a scientific roadmap might look like as we enter this new science of non-human intelligence. How do we transition from isolated anomalies into structured research programs? And what kind of institutional standards need to be in place? Statistical, biological, even epistemological, before we can raise claims to the level of real knowledge and full discovery of non-human forms of life. In this series, we're examining an 8-part roadmap as we begin to explore the reality of a potential non-human intelligence. And I'd like to put up on screen a slide. Here you will see, let's see, get back to this. There we go. You'll see the 8-part roadmap that we are working within in this series. And this panel wraps up the part 1 of the series on the scientific and research foundations of investigating non-human intelligence. But we look forward into 2026 and 2027 to explore these also additional very important areas of research and inquiry. With that, I'd like to welcome Ted Rowe. Ted is co-chairing this series with myself. And Ted, great to see you. Thank you for joining me. And I'll let you take it from here and introduce the speakers.
Well, hello, everyone. Today's panel discussion will focus on identifying the boundaries of a new science of non-human intelligence and map a path of research, collaboration, and funding. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. Dr. Gary Nolan, the Rachford and Carlotta A. Harris Professor in the Department of Pathology at Stanford University School of Medicine, a powerhouse of innovation. Dr. Nolan has published over 300 research articles, holds more than 40 U.S. patents, and has been recognized as one of Stanford's top 25 inventors. Beyond his pioneering contributions to cancer biology and immunology, Dr. Nolan is a central figure in the scientific investigation of the unknown. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Soul Foundation, an organization dedicated to establishing a rigorous academic framework for UAP research. His expertise has been sought by the U.S. government and aerospace companies to analyze medical data from individuals who have encountered anomalous phenomena, as well as to perform sophisticated isotopic analysis on alleged UAP materials. Whether sequencing DNA of controversial specimens or applying the scientific method to materials from beyond our current understanding, Dr. Nolan remains a fearless advocate for transparency and empirical inquiry. That would be Dr. Nolan. Dr. Beatrice Villaroyal, a leading astrophysicist and researcher at the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Physics in Stockholm. Dr. Villaroyal has gained international recognition for her innovative approach to searching for extraterrestrial intelligence by looking for physical artifacts rather than just radio signals. She is the principal investigator of the VASCO project, which uses historical data and citizen science to identify solar reflective transients years before the launch of Sputnik, in which suggest a possible presence of artificial objects in Earth's orbit decades ago. A recipient of the prestigious L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science International Rising Talents Award, Dr. Villaroyal is also the leader of the ExoProbe project, which actively hunts for extraterrestrial probes within our solar system. She is a prominent voice in the scientific study of UAPs, serving on the Natural Sciences Advisory Board of the Soul Foundation. And Dr. Massimo Teodorani, a prominent Italian astrophysicist whose career bridges the gap between conventional stellar physics and the rigorous study of anomalous phenomena. Holding a PhD in stellar physics from the University of Bologna, Dr. Teodorani has a storied background in mainstream research focusing on supernova, compact object binary systems, and SETI projects. He's perhaps most widely recognized for his pioneering work with Project Hestilin, where he spent decades applying astronomical and spectroscopic techniques to investigate plasma-like atmospheric anomalies. A prolific author of 25 scientific books, Dr. Teodorani's research also delves into the complex relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics. Please join me in welcoming our 3 panelists. They represent a scientific approach that is diverse. Dr. Villaroyal represents the historical and computational approach, looking for technosignatures that may have been overlooked in the past. Dr. Teodorani represents the physical and spectroscopic approach, focusing on capturing high-quality, real-time data from airborne open-air laboratories. Dr. Nolan represents the forensic and biological side of UAP research, using his background in pathology and immunology. He applies advanced technologies to analyze alleged UAP physical remnants and their biological effects. Together, these 3 scientists represent a multidisciplinary, data-first approach that aims to move UAP research from anecdotal storytelling into a rigorous, peer-reviewed academic framework. And so I'd like to open and ground our conversation with an opening question for all of our guests. Where does the scientific community stand right now on this issue? How is it engaging and how is it not engaging? And whoever wants to step up first, feel free to take the ball and run with it. Silence out there. Dr. Teodorani, would you like to speak to that?
Well, I don't see any real changement in our scientific establishment in the approach of this problem. There is still stigma. I don't see an evolution, at least not in my country. And so, but I noticed that several my colleagues are very curious, so they speak between themselves, but they criticize researchers that are studying this problem. Publicly, they criticize them, but privately, they are curious. So, official research establishment, in terms of establishment, is still, in my opinion, backwards. In spite of the fact that we have at the present time all the equipment, all the sensors that are necessary to make a big step forward in this research. So we have to convince them, we scientists, that it's time to turn this research from a curiosity into a key project of the same level as subnuclear research or cosmology, because it's very important, not because of the extraterrestrial thing, which is a possibility, but from the point of view of what we can learn from the physics point of view for our own knowledge. Okay, so I think this is my impression.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I agree with Massimo in that, in general, our research colleagues are more curious about it, a little more open to it. I found, at least in biology, in my more, immediate circles of scientific friends, I often get the statement, if it weren't for the fact that it's you saying it, Gary, I still would think it's crazy. Mm-hmm. And so, but I do see a general increase in those who already were pre-interested, willing to step forward. And actually, if anything, asking advice on how is it that they can step into the arena safely, and what are the rhetorical approaches that I've used, or at least I tell them the rhetorical approaches that I've used to allow for the question to be asked. And in some cases, the challenges that I give to them in terms of, again, something that Massimo just mentioned is how can you not be interested in the data or the results, or how can you, in some ways, dare not allow the question to be asked? What's wrong with that? Mm-hmm. And so I think, this might come later, but how do we formalize some of these kinds of points so that they could be easily repeated by individuals who want to put their toe in the water but are still afraid? So what are the simple teachings that we could do for that? The general public is a wholly different matter. They're much more open to it. But then they don't have their reputations on the line usually, at least the general public. So that's kind of I'm actually happy with the progress so far. Of course, I would always like it to be better, but.
Beatrice, your microphone's off.
Sorry, I
ahead.
agree generally with both Gary and Massimo in the way how I view it. It's a little bit more open now. It's not as bad as it was 5 years ago, but people are still very, very scared. And I think it's because the topic is very much associated with like once you enter it, you lose your credibility, people think. But people don't understand that credibility is like a golden cage. You are in it, but you're also stuck in it. And one has to somehow choose if you want to actually go and follow your curiosity, or if you want to play safe in front of your scientific peers to some extent.
Sure.
Ted, if I could follow on with a follow-up question to each of our panelists today. And before I do so, I just want to put up on screen a link and a QR code for those watching. If you'd like to ask questions, we'll make time for questions toward the end of the panel. All three speakers, Gary, Beatrice, and Massimo, have all given lectures here at the Investigating NHI series. I highly recommend watching those lectures. They are packed with insight and practical steps forward on the scientific front of NHI inquiry. So really recommend that. But to get back to our conversation here, is there, if you could articulate or summarize one scientific bottleneck that is preventing forward inquiry, what would that be? Would it be data quality? Would it be the professional stigma? Would it be
Fear?
missing? Okay. Gary?
Well, I don't worry so much about the professional stigma side of things if it's just about data collection. I think that each of us in our own specific realms have data collection standards or data collection modalities. I think at least within each of our parameter spaces, coming up with a model set of such things that the research community as a whole that are interested in this could add or subtract to, providing a pipeline of what those are would be good. I mean, obviously, Beatrice and Massimo can speak to the visual aspects of what might be seen in the sky, or in the atmosphere, in the case of Massimo's efforts with the plasma works at Hesselden. I'm interested in the other side, more about the material composition of things. And I think what, at least I find, is the biggest problem getting across to people is the cost associated with collecting the data. Each of the materials that I analyze at the level that I think is additional or to other stuff that's already out there is, whether you get it for free or not, because somebody's doing it for free, it still basically costs about $5,000 per sample for some of the more advanced techniques and somebody's time and effort. So I think we could all name our wish list of the best possible tools, but associated with that is cost and time, and then the expertise to analyze the data. And although we might represent three kind of top of the pyramid people, at the end of the day, we still need postdocs or volunteers with scientific background to do the work on it. So that's, it's both you need to put together the techniques and put together the people to analyze with the right kind of oversight, which is basically you're talking about how a laboratory usually operates. The PI operates, and then they have postdocs and or graduate students and or undergraduate students within them. Because for me, at least, that's where the ideas come from. I might have published zillions of papers, but it's only for the first, let's say, 8 to 10 years of my life that I actually do any of the experiments myself. It's usually directing my students and then packaging their work in a way that I know fits the scientific expectations.
So we have fear in the professional scientific community. We have the problem of cost and capacity to undertake this credibly. Massimo, is there anything else that comes to mind to you as a roadblock?
Well, I think we need a more analytical approach to the problem in terms of measurements, because what I'm observing since Project Esdalen in 1984 and Project Galileo since 3 years ago, I noticed that there is a sophisticated approach to very rigorous um, capture of data, but it's more in terms of surveillance system. I like to say we want a very high resolution image, but without trying to analyze more that image, namely making spectra. I say that because it's my specialty, or high speed photometry or something. I mean, we need now to go in depth, okay? Not only to say, yes, there is a phenomenon, we can distinguish it from airplane, from drones, from birds or so, but we have the potential to measure the phenomenon in great detail. In particular, some of these phenomenon, because I've been studying the literature, even if it is so-called gray literature, are very luminous. And this opportunity can help us to obtain high resolution spectroscopy. With high resolution spectroscopy, not only we can identify with a big precision chemical elements that are in produced by this light at night, but also how is the morphology of the spectral lines. In particular, a particular effect which is called Zeeman effect, which shows the power of a strong magnetic field. If we are able to measure the intrinsic magnetic field spectroscopically in a plasma light object, and if we are able to study how this changes in time, we are able to deduce a possible propulsion mechanism. I already did calculations about that, and a paper has been just accepted today. I'm very happy for that. So we need analytical approach immediately, because we need to learn how it works. That's the most important thing than saying all the aliens are here. We don't know. Probably it's so. So this is the way in which I see the thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
Okay, good. And we're going to get fully into what the instrumentation plan might be, the research roadmap in the middle part of the panel discussion. And I know you have a lot to say about it, Massimo. Also want to say that Massimo and Gary and Beatrice all gave talks at the UAP Summit on detecting and tracking UAP, and highly valuable talks. And Massimo has a lot to say on instrumentation. So we'll touch on it today, but if you want the deep dive, go log into the UAP Summit for that. So a kind of part two of this opening. Yes, Ted, anything you'd like to interject?
I wanted to ask one other question. We're talking about bottlenecks, and Massimo mentioned he's getting a paper published. Is publication a problem?
You mean publication in our
mainstream journals?
In mainstream journals? Absolutely yes. In fact, I am publishing on the Journal of UAP Studies, which is academic. Yes, it is, but is dedicated to this kind of phenomenon. If you try to submit a technical, even a very mathematical paper to a journal like the Physical Review, or like Astrophysical Journal, Astronomy and Astrophysics, Acta Astronautica, as soon as they see the word UAP or UFOs, they will reject systematically the paper without even reading the abstract. Okay, so there is no way to submit even a very mathematical or experimental paper to mainstream journals without being rejected. This is what I noticed. I hope the situation changes. But so far, I'm afraid It's not easy. I want to try because I'm preparing a very mathematical paper, I have to say, and I want to at least to provoke someone in the mainstream, and let's see what happens. Maybe I'm too much pessimist. Who knows? I want to try.
So where did Alcubierre, if I pronounce his name right, get his published? And how did he get it through?
Well, Alcubierre, when he published about warp drive, he published on a physics journal. But in this case, he didn't speak about UAPs or UFOs. He just spoke about one of the solution of the Einstein field equations. So it could be accepted like a standard physics paper because it was not only mathematically developed, but because it was not mentioned at all, UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
So it was accepted because it was not mentioning at all. But if he had mentioned UAPs inside this paper, probably they would have rejected. I think so.
I'm curious for Beatrice's experience. I mean, you're recently multiply published, and yet some challenges arose in the process. What was that like, and how do you see moving through that?
So it was super difficult to publish these papers, because I remember the scientific report, it was 5 months before we got the first review report. I think there were lots of internal discussions there. And then the other paper, I remember there was a funny situation with the PASP paper, because we were referencing the scientific report. And first we got back the comment like, maybe you shouldn't be referring to the work in the this submitted work, because it's not on preprint, they wrote. This one we had submitted the scientific report because we talked about the UFO nuke correlation. And then we thought, okay, so and they said, okay, you can only cite it if you put it on a preprint server. Okay, so we did. And then again, the editors wrote back and said, no, please remove the citation because it's not published. And that was it was quite determinedly worded. But then at the end, the scientific report, it was accepted. So then they had to allow us to cite this UFO nuke paper. And there was no way around it. But it was quite funny in this way, how they were just doing everything to avoid it for a while. So it's just one example. While in 2022, when we first submitted the older version of it, then it was rejected at the editor's desk immediately. Because it's one thing to talk about how to search for technosignatures, but don't come with any concrete results. That's a totally different thing. Unless you have negative results, then it's all fine. So there is so much stigma.
For those in the public watching this conversation who are not fully up to speed on the scientific method, they might be wondering, well, why bother? Why go through the morass of peer-reviewed journals and the scientific mainstream? And maybe Gary or Ted, because you have much more experience than myself in this, why is it so important to pursue peer review and to engage in that process?
Speaking
the peer review, people sometimes mistake peer review as agreeing with your, let's say, speculations or conclusions. Conclusions is a hard word. You can only really conclude things in math, where you can set the guardrails of the outcome very specifically. It's very hard, and we often do not in biology conclude anything. We just say it supports the hypothesis that. So my approach, whether it was the Atacama skeleton or the Council Bluffs paper or new papers that we are writing, is to very carefully only give a short paragraph as to the origin of the material or the sample in the case of the Atacama, and then just say, we're just here to figure it out, and then here's the data and our speculation. And we didn't get any pushback along the way for the Atacama. I mean, we got good reviewer feedback. And Beatrice, I would say 5 months, you're lucky. I mean, even my regular cancer biology papers, sometimes we have to ping the journals after 6 to 8 months and say, hey, are the reviewers done? So I wouldn't see too much. I wouldn't see that as anything more than, let's say, time and to find reviewers. The Council Bluffs was interesting, how easily that one went through. And I started this as, it's not about your conclusion. The real point of peer review is to say, to the extent that you have any data, did you use the right methods to come to any of the speculation or conclusions that you might have made? Now, reviewers don't always necessarily think the same way. Very often, reviewers think that their point in reviewing the paper is to tell you whether they think it's right or not. And especially if it might counter whatever their current bias is in immunology or whatever, they might push back. And so the key part in that back and forth discussion with the editor is, I at least find, to point out what that bias is verbally with the editor and not in writing, and then ask the editor how it is that I best address the bias in my reply to the reviewer without looking like I'm, yelling at them or calling them, idiots. Although a couple of times I've had to do so, literally in the review, say, this is so wrong that I question your competence. That, of course, usually elicits screaming and yelling on their side. But then I use that later with the editor to say, well, look, they were biased. They can't keep their cool.
So a little bit of scientific Fight Club strategy here for those who are in the ring. And I totally respect that and the process. And interesting to talk about methods, which is where we're going to go next in our conversation, is, if the methods are not clearly articulated and sound, then, the theory or the hypothesis can't be falsified. It can't be tested. It can't be replicated. So I mean, as a non-scientist myself, I can respect the process of verifying methods. I'd like to move on in this. Again, we're in the initial phase here of this conversation. And I know for those watching, the UAP or UFO newsfeed is dominated right now by the recent statement of intention by the sitting president of the United States, and a declaration to relevant agencies to release information regarding UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial, and alien life as a possibility. I'm curious, three scientists here with us on this panel, at this moment, what do you think the overall scientific community's response to this posture and to these statements should be?
Excitement.
No, Bea, speak.
Go ahead, Beatrice.
It should be excitement, because this is so interesting. If they release a lot of information, what can we learn? What new hypotheses can we build? Because there might come out something that will help us, or some piece of the puzzle that will just help scientists in how to pursue the scientific search of UFOs. But instead, we get SETI Institute. They go out and say that it basically obscures the research. And I'm just like, come on, guys. They made some public posts that I don't remember exactly how it was worded. Gary, do you remember if you saw it? I think you saw it.
I don't remember, but your take on it is, I think, correct, that they were saying it basically they're saying that it muddies the water. And I posted underneath is, well, you're fine if it's 400 light years away, because you can't actually go there and verify it. So this seems a very cowardly position to take. And so I think we have to just openly say that. It's sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And so that means sometimes going a little bit more than you would normally say in an open meeting. But, if you've ever been to any of the biology meetings that, I go to, there are open fights from the speaker's microphone to the person giving the talk, where people are arguing with each other. And usually the best thing to do is to say, okay, well, let's talk about it later.
But that is still a healthy sign, because when I was going to the SETI meetings in the past, it was the most boring meetings you could imagine. Everyone were sitting there saying, oh, that's so nice. Yeah, nobody has found anything, but that's a nice and beautiful suggestion of how to apply this or that filter to the radio data.
Yeah.
It was killed. I mean, it was so boring that one can't compare
Yeah, I
it
mean,
to anything else.
well, it's a shocking position. I mean, I remember, and this actually relates to Massimo's work. Jacques Vallée and I were asked by SETI to write a paper on, new SETI. And, it's online somewhere. It never really got published. It just got, put online. And we decided to make it about consciousness, a search for consciousness rather than a search for technology, because then you can start expanding your view of where it might be, and how it might communicate. And surprisingly, they accepted it for us. And I apologize, that's the leaf blower in the background. They accepted it to be put in, but they would not let Jacques come to the meeting. They would only let me.
That's
And
terrible.
I was just disgusted by it. And I said, no, I'm not coming. How dare you? He's my mentor. I'm here because of him and what I learned from him, not in spite of him, nor instead of him. So I never ended up going. And I probably would have been just as bored as you were, Beatrice.
Well, actually, I had a similar experience like you are sharing with that I applied to become an affiliate at the SETI Institutes. It was right before they got this $200 million. And I didn't have any position at that moment. I mean, or I was running short on the grounds, if we say it like that, like, the 1 month left or something of my postdoc. And so applying for this position, and then they write me back that, if you come here, that you cannot collaborate with this particular collaborator of yours because he's radioactive. So you can't have him on any projects or any papers or anything like that. So of course I also rejected it. I just don't accept that someone tells me who I can work with or not. It's just.
In the first lecture of this series, Dr. Mike Safone made a very compelling pitch to begin examining the Earth system for signs of life and potential technosignatures, and not bar that inquiry with this fixation on it must be sufficiently remote for it to be of sufficient validity for scientific inquiry. And I thought that was some great points made. I know, Massimo, you're trying to get a point in here. How do you see it?
Well, I have to speak about my experience in the SETI field, because I worked with SETI for at least 10 years with my group at Radio Astronomy Institute, and then by myself. I went to the Society of Astronautical Society in Europe at the San Marino Congress, SETI Congress, and I gave 2 presentations about technosignatures. One about Dyson sphere around other stars that are far away, and another one about hypermotion objects moving inside the solar system. And they appreciated, they clapped, and I was surprised because I spoke about technosignature. At some point, with the boss of the Congress, very good man, a very good scientist, I told I want to submit a paper, a peer review paper. He said, "Oh, you don't need that. You're sufficient, your abstract." They didn't want that I submit a paper about technosignatures at a time in which they still were thinking that hunters of technosignature are similar to ufologists or something like that. I won. I was able to publish 2 papers on Acta Astronautica. 2 years later, I wanted to submit a different paper because I'm not monomaniac about some things, but I like to explore several other possibilities. And one possibility was based on research on plasma and on the possibility that plasma behaves like a living being after physics research that were published on the New Journal of Physics, after work by Roger Penrose and Stuart Ameroff. Okay, so I submitted the possibility to monitor plasmas in order to see if there is some kind of intelligence, which was based on peer-reviewed paper published on physics journals. And the guy, the boss, told me, don't dare to come to Paris to the Congress because most of the committee voted against you. You know that you're very rigid, okay? Instead, I think you have to explore several possibilities that we don't know yet. What is life? We are not sure if life is based only on carbon or, in case, silicon and not on plasma form of life. So just to give you an example of my experience.
Okay, interesting stuff. So to play the devil's advocate, some of the science community and certainly in the general public might say, okay, well, the president has made this statement on his private social network. It's basically its narrative, its story. Gary, you have this great quote from the UAP summit that the problem with stories is that stories don't scale. What do you do with a story, right? What comes next? And so we have it remains at the level of assertion or some sort of mandate to relevant agencies. How should the scientific community be engaging at this point? What should they be asking for? How would they potentially track or parallel what could be, and let's take this on as a hypothetical, impactful information or evidence that is going to be released as a result of this? If that were to come out, how should science respond?
I would like, I don't want to remove the word from you, but very quickly, I've been already speaking at the Euro Parliament in Strasbourg in 2010, and I told publicly in a big conference there at the Euro Parliament that if some information will be publicly released by the authorities, it's very important that we not stories or only videos are released, but data, namely data coming from, for instance, from radar, pilot's radar, targeting pods, head-up displays, because the head-up displays record all the flight envelope of, and so also what has been detected. Okay, so what is important, if President Trump is promising release of information, he has to think that this information must be useful to do something, namely release data that we can process, not only stories. Or someone told me that someone else told me, no, we need data, namely numbers, that they surely have, but didn't understand what they mean, to give this data to us so that we can put this data on graphs. And from graphs, deduce equation. And from the equation, we can also understand not only the physical law, but also we are in a condition to tell to the authorities and to the military in particular if this phenomenon is a threat or not. So it's very important that President Trump or whoever after him thinks to the needs of scientists, because it's not we are not a Pickwick circle to speak between ourselves. We are here for the people, okay? And people want to know something very certain, and scientists can give something very certain.
Gary or Beatrice, how would you see science moving alongside potential federal disclosures?
Well, I think it depends on the maturity of the scientists that receive the data, because they can receive the best data possible and they can still just be completely rejecting it and refusing to believe, and they can say it's an artifact, or it's or it's an illusion in the data, or they can try to dismiss it all the time. And I think the only thing we can hope for is that people maybe get a slightly more open mind if there's a lot of release of information. So I don't think it's going to come a response the way as we wish. It's going to be a slow, successive opening of people's minds.
Okay. Any thoughts, Gary? on what comes next for science?
Yeah, sorry, I had to put this on because the leaf blower guy was outside. Well, I think, related to both what Massimo and Beatrice said, and then referencing what you did about stories, there's a whole field of math that's been around for 150 years that's relatively simple, and it's called Bayesian probability or Bayesian causality, where you can take and start with a very low prior, basically a 0.0001% chance, and then add in estimates of what the probability of each observation, whether it's anecdote or otherwise. And very quickly, interestingly, come to the conclusion that if you have actual measurements on an object with at least 3 or 4 different sensors, you very quickly escalate to near 98% probability of it being right with just simple math. Now, people might not like that. People might say, "Oh, I don't like that." Well, I'm sorry, that's the math. And you need something like 20 or 30 anecdotes of observing the same thing, given certain probabilities that each person is right, to come to a similar level of probability. If you add it all up and you throw a complex set of data at it, meaning the whole internet, Bayesian inference basically says, given the negatives and given the positives, you're already well above the threshold of 50%. You're in the 60 to 70% realm of probability that there's, that at the very least, as I always say, that the question is worth asking. And so these are the kinds of, that would be a paper that would be nice writing, because it's easy enough to do. You might not get it published in Nature or something like that, but if you position it as, I'm just asking the question about what is necessary, what are the fundamental metrics? Well, the fundamental metrics for each of us, Beatrice, me, and Massimo, is all math. The numbers and statistics have to add up, which is, I think, what Beatrice did beautifully, despite, and I'll say it publicly, despite what Waters and Knuth, I think, made a mistake on, and that they came at the problem. I know I'm starting a fight, and I'm sorry, but sometimes fights are good. That they used insufficient data. And not only did they use insufficient data, they inappropriately referenced what Beatrice was saying or doing in acknowledgments, basically casting aspersions on her. And I found that to be, frankly, both petty, awkward, and should never have been put out there. And so, Kevin and Wes, I'm talking to you directly. Go look at your acknowledgments. I'm telling you it's petty. Remove them.
Thank you.
We'll definitely
because it's not the correct way to do science.
I love
Sorry,
this.
I'm starting a fight.
I love
it's on
this.
me. It's not on Beatrice.
Yeah.
Fight
Well,
with me.
we'll definitely send this over to Kevin and Wes. And I'm sure they'll see it anyway. But I love this forward lean into figuring out how to do this and how not to do it. And we have to argue these front lines down to the inch millimeter level. And so thank you, scientists and scientific community. And I think this is not something to avoid. It's we have to lean into this moment, especially if potentially dramatic statements are made by acting agency heads. If information is brought forward, whether it's demonstrative, testimonial, or materials analysis of objects that suggest a non-Earth or non-human origin, it's going to be a major scientific fight to get down to the truth of what those are. So gear up and ready up for what that is. My next question, and Gary, you've kind of blown it open a little bit, which I love, was really, what would you accept as the first consensus moving piece of evidence for the scientific community that could arise out of a possible set of federal disclosures? Is it, to your point, Massimo, is it radar tracks? Is it, FLIR footage? Is it biological materials analysis? And to your point, Gary, just to bring it back in, the Bayesian approach, which is, it may not be one thing. It may be a combination or an addition, an additive nature of different things that suggest higher probability, if not full conclusivity. And that's really important too.
Well, I think if we could get video that is, let's say, provably non-AI. I mean, that label is always going to get thrown at any evidence these days, fortunately or unfortunately. So I think video or multiple simultaneous, again, let's say military released data of eyes on the object with multiple instruments is would be appropriate and could be, fed into a Bayesian inference engine. For me, materials is something made in a way that seems out of scope for human capability. Our recent observation that the silicon ratios of a large chunk of material seem so far off, and that, a postdoc over in the engineering department suggested that, the way to get this would be through neutron activation, and showed by equations that the ratios that we saw were exactly what the neutron exposure would accomplish. So I'm the original, scientist or the original skeptics. I don't need skeptics. And debunkers are certainly not scientists, and they're not skeptics either. And so I want people to tell me really why I'm wrong about what that neutron activation might mean. Somebody else come to me and say, hey, Gary, the equations are wrong. Oops, you made a mistake. Fine. Science is right today, wrong tomorrow, and righter the day after. And that's the way it should progress, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Beatrice or Massimo, what do you think would be the base minimum evidence to move forward?
Well, something I can say that I dream of is that I would really like to not only detect objects, let's say in these old plates, or detect them today, but imagine if we actually could get one of these objects down so that, for example, Gary could do the material analysis. For me, that is kind of the holy grail, to get access to the physical material, because I don't only want like indirect evidence or imaging evidence of something that is impossible to touch. I would like to actually have physical samples. And I think that is kind of the goal, maybe for all of us, to get that kind of physical sample so that we are 100% sure that this is really not ours. This is really not something humans can produce.
Yes, this is very important. I reconnect to Beatrice's discourse. It's an example that I take from astrophysics. In astrophysics, how do we understand the physical mechanism, for instance, that animates active galactic nuclei? How do we understand that there is a big super mega black hole in the nucleus of these galaxies? How do we know that some stars called Cepheids are pulsating? We know that not from static images, but we know from the variability of their light observed simultaneously in several wavelengths, from the radio wave band up to the gamma rays. Okay, so only studying the variability of a phenomenon, we can understand the physical mechanism. So I want to apply the same mechanism when we study light phenomena in the sky, because the physics is the same. It's the same photonics, it's the same electromagnetic spectrum. And if we are studying something that is flying in the sky, is like to make, in my opinion, back engineering of an object, not while it is inside an hangar, but while it is flying. So we can understand how it works by the effects it produces in the sky. So maybe it could be sufficient only 1 minute of observation, if we are lucky enough, if we are able to see a correlation between color, amplitude of the light, radar signature, magnetic field, and we see how it changes in time, we might deduce the effect that a propulsion mechanism produce in our environment. And that would be, I could say, a smoking gun.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. At this point, Ted and I would like to move on to kind of another part of the conversation and begin to look at what this series is articulating as a new science of non-human intelligence. We're only all here because there are growing signs that UAP are structured craft, apparently in some cases and in some classes not under human control. There's no prosaic explanation for them. And there are increasing allegations by credible witnesses and whistleblowers regarding efforts to reverse engineer these craft and to extract technologies from them. So in this space, there are growing indications that there is some form of non-human intelligence in the form of technology or interactivity at play. And so the next part of this conversation is really about that. How do we approach this new science? And to begin this, I'd like to play back this 4-minute selection from the first lecture in this series by Dr. Michael Safone called Toward a Science of Non-Human Intelligence, where Dr. Michael Safone kind of introduces this concept, and then we can talk more about it and begin to parameterize this science. What is the science? How do we approach it? And how do we begin to do it? So let's listen.
I'm here not as an expert in NHI, but as a philosopher and researcher working on the conceptual and methodological foundations of a potentially young science. Right? For me, it's a science of UAP, but in this lecture, I want to move from UAP to this question of non-human intelligence. It is a young science, a proto-science, you might even say, that is in development right now, right, as we speak. So you've got craft that are being recorded, things that look like craft, objects that are that seem structured, that they're exchanging electromagnetic energy on radar, et cetera, right? Performing just incredible feats of kinematic, pyrotechnics, as it were. And some of these cases seem to be very suggestive of the operation of some form of intelligence. And this brings the question of non-human intelligence very close, right? And so, there's that joke, not in my backyard, NIMBY, right? And for SETI, it's like not in our backyard, but if it's distant, okay, we can sort of deal with it. So here we have to kind of start to encounter this nearby, right? And that's what's interesting. In the modern era, we just have banished that as a possibility on the Earth for various reasons. So that's what's really interesting about this, is that we sort of cross from religion and spirituality right into the heart of science itself, and have to try to situate the question of non-human intelligence as not a non-local phenomenon at a distance, but rather as a local phenomenon right up close here on the Earth. The question, however, is how do we do that, right? We have to chart a path from the kinds of evidence and the challenges that are faced with the sorts of data and evidence that we might think that we have, to get to the point, right, to where we can be fairly confident that, in fact, what we are dealing with, at least in some subset of these unidentified aerial or anomalous phenomena, that in fact what we may be dealing with is a non-human intelligence. And if that is the case, then the question is, how do we study that as a matter of science, right? Science doesn't study non-human intelligence that is not at least as intelligent as we are, right? We don't have a science that examines an intelligence that might be more advanced or more ambiguous to even detect or encounter, right? More and more, right, scientists are getting interested in that, right, in bringing to bear the traditional structures of research and data gathering, instrumented observations, right, putting instruments, well-calibrated, well-characterized instruments on the problem, right? And this represents, in my view, this emergence of a kind of a science, right, around this phenomenon, trying to deploy observational and even experimental sciences. This, to me, represents a rather significant and noteworthy historical, philosophical, and methodological shift from how the subject had been essentially or effectively engaged in the past.
Okay, so we'll stop there. Do encourage folks to check out Mike's first lecture in the series. It had some great material and a great perspective. Mike is a philosopher of science and is the founder of the Society for UAP Studies. Ted, why don't you kick off this section and get us talking about this new science? Ted, I think your microphone is muted.
Sorry about that. I'll just start with a basic question. How do you see the potential emergence of a science of non-human intelligence? What is the new science? What are the key pillars of inquiry? And how do we begin?
Open question.
Well, of course, this new science, this new subject of science must be treated very rigorously. Clearly, rigor is the most important thing because of obvious reasons. But being rigorous doesn't mean that we have to put, black glasses that allow us to look all in one direction. We have never to lose the attention on the phenomenon itself, because otherwise we risk to select what we like more, what is more similar to our categories than to what it really is. So what do I want to say? I want to say the phenomenon probably, surely, is not only a physical phenomenon, but it's something that affects also consciousness, mind, the psyche, and so we have to consider integrally all these factors if we really want to understand what is the UAP phenomenon. So we have to have the courage to face even aspects that are scandalous, okay, for our science. But we never have to lose the attention to the phenomenon itself, all its details, because they are important. And I repeat, they have a strict relation with our consciousness. So much that sometimes I'm wondering if this phenomenon is occurring without witness, or if the witness is an important factor to make the phenomenon occur. So this is my thing.
And I want to invite the other panelists to ask each other questions, challenge each other, query each other. You're all on three different sides of the same triangle. So please.
I must admit, I am a very simple person when I'm thinking about the UAP research, and I kind of just think about when I imagine how I want to do, I'm thinking about that. First, I like it hypothesis driven, and instead of trying to explain all the aspects of the UAP research, I just ask myself the question, are there NHI artifacts and where are they? And then I get tempted to search in space, in the atmosphere, in on the ground, underground, in the waters, and in the oceans. And in that sense, if one does it over all the domains, from space to the deepest oceans, then you can actually develop different ways of detecting them in space, detecting them in the atmosphere. And if you have some very good candidate for a buried flying saucer, then you go for it. You simply go there and you try it out. So I'm thinking very much hands-on is the way how we can develop a lot of protocols as well. Of course, we need to have of course, you want to sharpen your knife before you go out in the battle, but you also want to actually perform the actual experiment. And like both, you need to both have the plan, but you also need to try out and see where it leads. There's some sort of balance. If you think too much, you will not do, and if you do too eagerly, then you are going to waste a lot of resources and time. So there's some balancing game here.
You know, Beatrice, this use of the word artifact is very interesting here. And I know in Mike Saffone's talk, he talked about how this is potentially a relational science. We're not observing a mechanistic phenomenon that is unintelligent, right? Technologies are suggestive of design by an intelligence. And so artifacts to me, as a non-scientist, when I hear artifact, I think of civilization. Right. I
Yes.
think of signatures of intelligence that have imprinted themselves in physical, designed pieces of technology that solve problems, that engage other intelligences. And so that's a very interesting framing. And Massimo, to your point about interactivity at the level of consciousness as well. And so how do we get out into the field, you know, at the level of instrumentation and designing a field research project to detect and ultimately generate data upon something that may see us, perceive us, elude us, want to engage us. You know, I think at one point, Massimo, I actually have your slide here. We can put it up.
Yeah,
I'll put up
the
your last
second,
slide.
the second one.
Oh yeah, let me get back there.
No, before that.
Right. So I see EM monitor, biotesting.
Yeah, this was an experiment that we discussed with a colleague in 2007 in Austria, in Salzburg, at the Quantum Mind conference organized by Professor Stuart Ameroff. And the point is that, is there a relation between the UAPs and consciousness? The point of interest is not that we like to speculate about that. It's fun speculating, but here we need data. So everything started when several people told me personally that these lights, incorporeal lights like light bulbs, are speaking in my mind. Okay. Of course, I cannot laugh at them, especially when these people say, "Oh, don't speak about me. I don't want that people knows, but you must know. These lights are speaking in my mind." When one person is speaking, might be mad, okay, but when 10 persons are telling exactly the same thing, make me malicious, okay, in the sense that why not make a measurement? We take a person and we put an EEG apparatus, and at the same time we observe the phenomenon at locations where the phenomenon is very recurrent, like Esdalen, for instance, but not only Esdalen, also Cape Fear River in North Carolina and many other places in the United States. We put the person there. At the same time, we monitor the phenomenon with several instruments like spectrometers, video cameras, and at some point we make a test. We aim a laser beam against the light phenomenon, and we see if the phenomenon reacts. Why do we want to see that? Because it happened in 1994 when Erling Strand of Project Esdalen aimed a laser beam, and the phenomenon changed rate of pulsation 8 times out of 9, like if it was communicating. But the point is not only to see if the phenomenon is reacting. The point is that if there is an entanglement mechanism of some kind between the phenomenon and our brain, does our brain wave change at the same time in which the phenomenon is changing? Because at that point we would establish the possibility of a connection of some kind that could be measurable. Okay. Conversely, we could use Michael Persinger instrument, the so-called God helmet, and we trigger the brain of the person, and we see if at the same time the light phenomenon is changing its pulsation rate, its color, its light amplitude. This is clearly an hypothesis, but I am malicious and I would like to test it. It's not very difficult to test it, and not even very expensive, I would say. With $200,000 and a good neurophysiologist that is with us, I think we could do that. This is only one of the experiments that I proposed anyway.
I actually have a question for you, Massimo, actually, and Beatrice. It's often been talked about that some of these objects might be manipulating gravity in the process of moving. So there are gravity detectors that could be deployed, and yet I rarely, if ever, see them listed amongst the tools or instruments that we should be using.
Absolutely. Gravimeters, and not only that, but also, there is so-called the gravitational lensing that is an effect, relativistic effect that we are observing, especially with galaxies, but also as a method to detect extrasolar planets. In gravitational microlensing. Practically, if there is a UAP in the sky and there is a field of stars around, we expect that those stars are moved like from a lens, like looking through a glass, okay? And also the light would be amplified. Another test would be to use a laser beam towards the object, and I would expect a curving of this laser beam. If we measure the distance of the object, if we measure the curving and the angle, we can deduce something about the gravitational field or about the so-called warp bubble in which the object could be in order to avoid inertia. Otherwise, everything would be crashed inside, okay? So this is just an idea, but the gravimeter is the first. Only problem is that it's very, very, very expensive instrument.
You need to find somebody in a mining company because they use it all the time to look for metals.
Good idea. Yeah. Maybe we could rent some of these instruments according to the needs of the day. For instance, I was looking at the Skinwalker Ranch telefilms series, and they often rent instruments at the need, not buy the instruments, but they just rent, like ground penetrating radar, high speed cameras. So we wouldn't spend so much money if we rent only for a week, for instance.
Yeah, if you'd like to learn more, those watching, about detection mechanisms, again, the UAP Tracking Summit had a lot of this on tap. And I know I just got a message from John and Jerry Tedesco last night about an instance of both electromagnetic interference and another instance, I believe, of what they are doing is shining some sort of laser beam upon the object and watching how it interacts. So it's fundamentally an interactive kind of scientific process. And we have a comment here from Julia Mossbridge in the chat. If I can get it back up. Julia will be speaking in the series shortly. One missing piece in all of this is our understanding of perception. The field of perception and cognitive neuroscience need to be integrated with material examinations. Then we will move faster.
Along the lines of what Julia is saying here, as we talk about an emerging science of non-human intelligence, when do we get to the point where we're talking about the non-human intelligence and not so much about their artifacts and the behaviors of their artifacts?
I always personally worry about trying to interpret they're intense, if only because I can barely sometimes figure out what my husband wants, for dinner,
Sure.
or what another human wants. But may I sort of switch back to a question which was asked about what the science is? So in my area of oncology and cancer, we've been collecting data for 40, 50, 60 years, almost as long as the UAP. And often we were repeating experiments that had actually already been done. Or even if we came to a conclusion, we didn't have the access, or I don't have access to every single immunologist that could comment on what it is, nor do I have access to the greater literature that's already out there. And so we've been developing AI programs in our lab using large language models as the base. And again, much like what, let's say, the kind of data that Beatrice has collected, these images of cancer have enormous amounts of embedded knowledge in them that, relationships that wait to be understood. So I think an underutilized, but soon can be greatly utilized opportunity is to collect all of the data, put it into, an AI foundational models to retrain the base models with the raw data, because the raw data that's in there is basically only the stuff that's from Wikipedia. Whereas you've got people like Isaac Coy, of course, Jacques Vallée, Keith Baskerville, and many others who have great databases that can help us contextualize the information and find connections. That's, of course, what large language models do, is find connections that you didn't know were there. And again, back to, we've shown how useful that is now in cancer research, being able to recontextualize and find these hidden things that, oh my God, if I'd only looked up this paper or known about this paper, I could have understood why it is that I'm getting X, Y, or Z results in my experiments or in cancer. So I think this is more of a challenge of opportunity to the community. There's probably hundreds of AI experts out there, because I'm certainly not one, that could bring their talents to bear on this. I mean, I know Jonathan Berta was doing something like this and getting great results, but this needs agentic systems to go out, find the data, put it all together, and help us find things that we might have missed.
Yeah, apropos for the moment, because agentic systems are poised to take over many processes throughout society in many sectors. And I would imagine the growing data set, around UAP activity, especially if there are renewed disclosures and documents that could be released, could hasten that process.
Well, imagine using LLMs or doing a foundational model with all of the pictures and data that Beatrice has collected. I know that she's probably doing.
Actually, we have one guy now, I will not say who started applying machine learning to our 107,000. And my God, so interesting things come out, and I'm just like,
I could only imagine.
It's so cool.
I mean, because we've done that, I mean, my field has done the same thing. There's a guy at Harvard who has done this on hundreds of thousands of tissue biopsies from cancer. And the results that come out are, they're right in front of you. You go, oh my God, if I were just smart enough to have seen it. But once it's pointed out, you jump at the opportunity, because in my case, it's cures that are there and diagnostics.
That's amazing. And it's the same happiness here when we hear from this guy. It's like so exciting. It's a completely new world opened up, because when we were sitting in the past just trying to solve certain hypotheses with the data, and suddenly it's a complete, like a flood of information coming in. It's beautiful.
Can't wait to see
Ted,
the paper.
while we're on the AI question, because we are on the AI question, I'm curious for the panelists here, considering the various data sets that are relevant to this new science, whether it's experiencer data, whether it's sensor data, astronomical analyses like you've done, Beatrice, how could AI be deployed? What would be one high value material step forward to advance our understanding using AI or machine learning?
Well, if you identify a favorite type of anomaly and you have all kind of data sets, maybe you can train your AI to recognize that type of anomaly across different kind of like heterogeneous data sets. Because very often we get stuck with one data set because of the complexity to shift. But what if we can actually combine different type of sensor data, different type of instrumentation coverages and all kind of things, and let your AI identify that one particularly exciting anomaly? I mean, that would be very, very nice, because then you don't even need to get stuck on some kind of on some expensive instrumentation. You can just use what's in the public domain.
Yeah, and that's what, again, we used for our cancer work. It's already in the public domain. I mean, why, the title of my talk these days is, the end of data paralysis, LLMs and the future. And I think the audience, for those who are not experts in this, need to distinguish between what is machine learning, which is just finding these statistical relationships, versus what are large language models and agents capable of doing, which are sort of the evolutionary descendants of machine learning, or machine learning now going through its own renaissance and Cambrian explosion.
Interesting. Massimo, what excites you on the machine learning front with UAP data or NHI data potentially?
Well, clearly, it's nice to use it to distinguish anomalies from known objects. For instance, when you use surveillance system sensors, like the one of Project Galileo, which is very, very well calibrated and very well done by very competent people. I have been working with them for 1.5 years, by the way. And well, you are able to distinguish real anomalies from birds, airplane, insects, lens flare, and many other effects, which automatically and instantly exclude these effects from the analysis, so that they allow us not to waste time in things that are completely useless. Okay, so there are several situations that can deceive us. Okay, they can be colored lights, they can be simply planets or something. We have to be able to exclude. AI is able to do that. And at the same time, the instrumentation, the capability of the instruments is able to make a sort of sensor fusion, just like aboard an F-35 fifth generation fighter, which have on only one screen, there are all the data compacted all together and filtered from prosaic objects, thanks to machine learning and to AI. So this is my way to see it.
Before we depart the AI question, Gary, I'm curious your thoughts. In the 2024 Soul lecture you gave, you talked about, garbage in, garbage out, but with AI, there's the potential that we get something better out despite the ingestion of data that may not be high veracity, high quality. And, I turn my attention to the 150,000 lines of Newfork data, the 120,000 entries in Kufos's database, the Humcat database, the MUFON's database, which is enormous. How could all of this data be synergized, synthesized, and then how could machine learning generate something from it that is more than what would appear to be,
Right.
a low validity finding?
Well, I think we need to convince the large language model purveyors, whether it's, let's say, Anthropic or OpenAI or Google, et cetera, we need to provide a list of what those databases are and where they are first, because I'm not sure that they're being ingested. And getting them ingested into the LLMs basically means you don't have to go and retrain the LLM. I mean, the foundational models is basically a taking of somebody's base model and then giving it more data to retrain it, to bias it towards understanding your data sets. But why should we have to do that if we could make a list of where they are and then make sure that, and I know that there are people within, these various organizations, whether it's Google, Gemini, Anthropic, et cetera, who, and even Elon Musk for Grok, who want to know this. Now, I think the worry might be with let's say the release of information that might come from the Trump administration is that it might be purposefully seeded with irrelevant data or incorrect data. But I would just warn anybody who thinks that that would be an appropriate tack to take, is that these days it's very easy to pick up, that kind of stuff, or to have it aborted for consideration by comparing it against other data. So but we have to start by making it obvious where those databases are, whether it's Newfork or others, or Baskervilles or Isaac Coy's, et cetera. A different conversation might be around whole NHI is we're about to have our own NHI that we're building through AI. So the question of whether there is such a thing as non-human intelligence is already at our doorstep. And so, but that actually might be an avenue through which one can war game the idea of NHI by saying, well, okay, maybe there is no such thing as NHI, but we're about to make one. So why don't we talk about what we're gonna and how we're gonna think about that?
Right. Yeah, the AI conversation seems to be something of a stepping stone for discussions of non-human intelligence, as all of these debates on controls and mechanisms for human safety get debated. I know the Human Institute has gathered a very extensive assessment of available data sets that are out there. There's a lot more than I thought available in the public domain. And to your point, Gary, has it been ingested by the major LLMs? Maybe not.
It has not. I can tell you that for a fact.
Okay.
So
well,
you
no
should
wonder
just
when
send
you ask
it to them.
Right. And the experiencer data set is another kind of like peak topic to discuss here, which is there are hundreds of thousands of instances of people claiming to have had engagements. Now, of course, was it collected well? Was it well curated? Did it weed out all of the other confounding factors? No, of course not. But all of it taken together, what could we glean from that? I'm curious your thoughts on, because again, the science of NHI might be a highly interactive one, right? It might be two sentiences interacting. So the experiencer record is actually right smack in the middle of what the fundamental data set might ultimately be. So what do we do with experiencer data?
So I think that, along with the UAP, is you might not want to just put it into Google's mega LLM because of the way that the weights between tokens are measured. Then, at least insofar as I'm reading it these days, is that the best way that people sometimes think it should be done is that you create using the small LLM models and you weight the small models, because then you don't have to weight a 50 trillion token model. But that the agents then decide which models to go talk to, depending upon the question. So basically, the lower level LLMs present a list of what it is that they're capable of, or what they're an expert in. And then you have a super agent that sits and goes and sends out and gets information from them, because the local LLM, for instance, of a simple LLM, might not be tainted by, let's say, what the government puts out. And so by keeping them in a way siloed, but then having a higher level agent that can talk to all of them and extract the needed information, that can be used to counter any negativity that's put out, or let's just say incorrect data that's put out by others. So I would create an experiencer foundational database using one of the simpler models that are out there.
Okay.
But it costs money to do it.
Yeah.
It costs money. It's not free.
I can't help it, but sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I can't help it, but my imagination went a bit wild now. I started imagining if the NHI are actually just some very advanced AI, then isn't there also a bigger risk that instead of interacting directly with us, they will interact with us through our AI? Maybe they will interact with us through ChatGPT and Claude and DeepSeek. And we will be talking to this to this ChatGPTs and thinking, oh, I'm having such a synchronicity today. But maybe it's a more effective way to communicate with humans than by flashing a light in front of our eyes. And how would we measure that? Because maybe there's a way to measure if there's something anomalous happening to our AI as we communicate with it as well.
Well, I think Jacques came up with the idea years back, with the control system. It sounds like a super AI. It sounds like the ASI that humans are on the road to developing. So, just in the last year, look at how far we've come with AI. And now I'm already shocked. So imagine what it's going to be a year from now or 100 years from now. So we are on the path to being what somebody else might have already done 1 million years ago and then sent our way. Right. And they figured out how to communicate in non-electromagnetic terms at greater than the speed of light, somehow reaching under the substrates of the universe and using physics that we don't quite yet understand.
Well, longstanding presence and interaction might lead to some attempt to provide or create or engineer a coupling mechanism between intelligences, an interoperability between minds. So, and technology and data systems might be more central to that than we know. Fascinating stuff. I love this topic. Ted, I thought we would go to a few questions from the audience because they're starting to pile up.
Sounds good. Who do we have the Slidos? There we are. Here we are. Let's see, who are we gonna pick here?
I think we can just go right down the list. We tried to sort them last time, it didn't work so well.
Okay, we'll just start with the top one then. For Dr. Villarreal, notwithstanding the glinting in the 1940s, what is the current extent of glinting and formations that are now documented in more recent sky surveys? This is kind of specific to your work, Beatrice.
So today you have something like maybe on average 1.7 flashes per hour per square degree or something like that. I think I estimated it so. And if you compare it to the numbers we had in the 40s, then it's maybe 1.2 or 1.1 flashes per hour per square degree. So it's more today, of course, because you have lots of much more space debris, and you have many more satellites and more garbage. But we have it today as well. There's lots of these flashes happening all the time from geosynchronous orbits.
Fascinating. So, you want to do the next one, Reed, or shall I take that one? Your mic's off, Reed.
Thank you. I want to remind the viewers we're going to stay relevant to the conversation. So I'm seeing some questions in here that are a little outside the bounds. I will ask, let's see here. Let's ask this question. I mean, I know it's very much in the UAP news feed these days. To the panel, has anyone heard of the alleged ET craft that's too large to move just out Seoul, South Korea? Shouldn't this be top of the agenda in determining the existence or non-existence of potential ET? Worst case, it's fake. Best case, world science changes forever.
We have another case of a very funny saucer that we're working at. So I prefer to work on something that is a little closer. There are actually more such candidates all over the world.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the holy grail, right? It's the smoking gun to find a crashed vehicle or, a deceased body, non-human body. Is that going to really come our way? And this is where I wonder about the potential disclosures that might come out of the IC and the defense community. It's not going to be anything like that, right? It might be photographic evidence. It might be materials analysis in the form of a report or a paper. It might just be testimony from an acting agency lead. So, minus the craft in the ground or the body on the ground, what do we do with evidence that is suggestive of physicality, of technology, and biology? I'm actually curious, Gary, for your thoughts on that, because I can imagine hypothetically some of that information coming out regarding the vehicles themselves. But what would science do if they can't see the vehicle, if you can't put it under the microscope?
Well, I think knowing that, let's say we knew that it was somewhere, that somebody admitted it was somewhere, clamoring for access, not because you just want to know, but because you think you can do something practical for humanity with it, is the kind of leverage that I think you would need to use. Look, I would love to know. It just, selfish kind of, that's just, I want to know what I don't know kind of thing. But I think if one could make the reasonable argument that there are discoveries to be made, then you might not just leverage yourself, but you might leverage the opinion of industry and the venture communities, and not just the Department of Defense or War or whichever it is that we're going to call it.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to ask this last question before we move on. Maybe we'll bring it on screen, or I can just read it. Isn't it true that science faces a dilemma dealing with this topic, since a controlled environment is not possible? Because since NHI have capabilities far exceeding human capabilities, they may be directly influencing or manipulating the data that we are able to collect. How do we overcome this? And, Richard Dolan called this data denial in his talk at the UAP Summit, that there are in the USO record so many instances of the attempt to collect data denied or appearing seemingly intentionally obfuscated or obstructed. So as scientists, operating in a preferably controlled environment, how do you overcome that? If I were to make a slight adjustment to the question.
I've spoken enough, so I'll give other people a chance to step in.
Massimo, you've been out in the field with Hessdalen, and you've observed some of this interactivity. How do you think systemically, if we were to deploy, detection systems globally, or a mesh network of passive radar or what have you, if the phenomenon is able to effectively alter those devices, change what they collect, or disable them at the minimum, how do we then respond to that?
Well, we have to find out a way to use a sort of Faraday cage and to protect from electromagnetic interference. And in my missions, what happened? In my missions abroad, it happened not so much in Norway, but in Arizona, because I was in Arizona desert. Batteries were fading out, were consuming very quickly, and they were new batteries, by the way. I remember once I was there with my two colleagues, Erling Strand and Marsh Adams, and I was with my Questar telescope with high resolution spectrograph in the eyepiece, looking towards a place where there is a military base. I could see very well a light that was falling from the sky, but very quickly, very rapidly. So I went to the shutter. There was a Nikon camera attached to the telescope, but the camera didn't work because the batteries were completely gone, and yet they were new batteries. Okay, so there is a component of interference, no doubt, in this kind of phenomenon. We have to find out a way to screen them with a sort of Faraday cage or something that we have to think about. And this is very well documented in an important monograph by Dr. Mark Rodegier about electromagnetic interference with vehicles. And this is very, very dangerous, especially if it happens near airplanes. NARCAP knows very well this thing. So we have to think how to screen ourselves and our instruments from these effects.
Mm-hmm. And it would seem, evidence of manipulation is potential data in and of itself. The non-operation of technologies. Is there a way to collect data on when things fail? And I'm thinking of like the loss of power or electromagnetic anomalies in the localized power grid or something like that can demonstrate low probability that it's of a human cause, high probability or higher that it's of anomalous cause.
I think one needs to do that. One needs to have a very clear logging of the events when you go there. Like we had that when we had these 2 expeditions to the Baltic Sea anomaly. There was the GPS failure the first time, right over the anomaly, but there was also that the 2 underwater robots stopped working when they went when they tried to go down. And the only thing we will be able to do now is to try to, next time we go out, try to see, writing up the exact time. Did it work? Did it not work? How is it in a different environment when we're not above the anomaly? Does it work there at the same depths, or does it... the only thing one can try to do is to gather statistics. Mm-hmm. Just try to get as much statistics, do as many attempts as you can, in a controlled environment before, and then when you're above the anomaly. Mm-hmm. That's how we will try to approach it.
And that is data. I mean, repeated failure or battery drainage is data. I try to tell the people on the Skinwalker Ranch that. I said, that's data. Why don't you go out and just do an experiment where, suddenly your database for stars disappears from 3 astronomers' computers. Mm-hmm. Why? I mean, that's data. That's not a failure. That's actually a success.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a way of I often try to think of, if it's an intelligence, it's playing a game of cat and mouse. Can you trap me? Mm-hmm. And the trap is to say, okay, if you force me to fail, I'm going to use that as data of success.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the way a flashlight functions in a controlled environment like my backyard is a articulable baseline, right? And so if my flashlight suddenly drains its battery in 30 seconds, right? I mean, that's data collection in a controlled environment. And so I've heard from so many folks out in the field who are doing technical detection of just all the equipment going dark, right? Or cell phones becoming extremely hot to the touch, or, and then of course there's the psychological and physiological effects that some have reported. So all of that is data, to your point, Gary. In the time we have left, and I think we can go to the top of the hour. If anyone has to jump sooner, feel free to do so. I'd like to put this up on screen here. This is the slide, one of the slides, Gary, from your talk, A Pragmatic Agenda for Non-Human Intelligence and Anomaly Research. And there were a number of extremely, intricate and nuanced slides that I was hoping, Gary, you might unpack briefly. But in short, what is the pragmatic research agenda for taking this forward? Would love your thoughts.
Well, I think just iterating protocols at the beginning. That here's the protocol of how you do this. Here's the protocol of, again, along the lines of the earlier discussion for literature. Here's how you write the letter to the editor. And here's how you don't make any claims that are hyperbolic. And then, to the issue around Beatrice and her work is, here's how you act within the framework of normal scientific discourse to address a problem. And be aware when you do such a thing as what I referenced in the acknowledgments, is that there is a paper trail that I'm aware of. And that paper trail underscores a little bit of hypocrisy that's ongoing even amongst the community. So even us scientists need to stick to our unspoken oath of how science is done and the collegiality that's required despite disagreement.
Mhm.
And so if we can't come together, and if we can't see how the outside influences are attempting to put us at each other's throats, SETI versus UAP, as a for instance, then we're letting base human instincts drive us and not our supposed higher consciousness.
Well said. Yeah. Thank you for that, Gary. And if I just may throw in, as an observer of the scientific community's efforts, I've always respected the international science community as an analog for what human collaboration can look like. Like, we collaborate across all boundaries to get things in the sky, to, get a mission to a foreign body in the solar system. And so if the science community breaks down around this and cannot be collegial, then our frameworks for human cooperative and united responses to this begin to look more bleak.
Well, we kind of have to be a bit more collegial also, because if we are not, then we are scaring the rest of the people from speaking up. And we don't want people to be scared to say, hey, I found something interesting. We want people to feel safe, to be direct. We can disagree, but it has to be done with respect. Not in any ways not trying to tear each other down, but respectfully disagree and respectfully discuss, because that way we challenge each other. Healthy ways of disagreement is good in science. So maybe that's something we can work on also as a community.
Oh, you're such a dreamer, Beatrice.
We got to protect the good hearts in the fight here. Beatrice is most certainly one of them. And you've taken some major professional risks, Beatrice, to get impactful research done and published, and we commend you for that. And that should be a guiding light.
And I think her work is really one of the most impactful because it went worldwide. And I also know that should it be shown to be off or incorrect, Beatrice will be the first to agree.
Exactly. So far, it looks quite good with the new stuff we're doing. So I'm excited about that. And who knows, maybe it turns out that we have discovered something completely different that we can't even imagine now. And that would also be exciting, in my opinion. But you have to try. You have to attempt, and you have to do the best you can with the available methods and without fear.
But I think as well, the work that Massimo did at Hesdelin and all the rest was also exemplary of the kind of work that could be done. I mean, I hoped, and actually I wanted to ask Massimo, was there in any of those results that you had? Well, two things. One, did it look like some sort of just geologic formation that was forming these balls of lightning? Was there any sense that there was intelligent movement? What would be your unclaimable conclusion?
Good question. Well, I had an experience there. I was there 5 times. So I can tell you that the impression is that in the beginning, these lights that are very close to the ground are triggered by some geophysical process like piezoelectricity, for instance. In reality, and mysteriously, the data that have been collected, especially since the 90s, I would say since the 80s, but then in the 90s there was a Norwegian station, have shown that in reality there there are two kinds of phenomenon, at least two kinds of phenomenon. One is apparently natural, but very interesting because we don't know why ionizing process in the atmosphere, eventually of geophysical origin, remain self-contained for so long time. It should expand and cool very quickly in a few seconds. Instead, evidently there is a mechanism of plasma confinement, and this is very interesting for physics. So there is this phenomenon on one side, and on another side, another kind of clearly very structured phenomenon, which I have seen at least three times, that apparently overlaps with this geophysical phenomenon. Sometimes I like to joke and telling, well, maybe there is someone from external space that want to come to Isdalen to make a gasoline, to stock electricity, that something like that. It's very funny, but anyway, I remember three times in particular. Once there was a big triangular object over our heads. It stayed about 10 minutes. It rotated over our heads. I signaled with a laser on the lawn, asking land now, but it didn't. It was just over our heads. It rotated and it disappeared. Literally, it didn't go away. It disappeared. It had three lights at the vertices. Okay. Another time was a very little light, like a giant firefly. I calculated 40 centimeters, okay, so more than 1 foot, 2 feet. That was standing in front of a tree 90 meters away from us, I calculated, translucent. It lasted also 10 minutes there. So another kind of phenomenon. There is not only one phenomenon in Estalin, there are two. One is artificial. 10%, but the most spectacular. Just to finish, there is a famous video in Stalin in December 1999, where you clearly see a very structured triangular, totally luminous object, so different from the one I saw, which is literally sucking one of those light balls. And I will show it in a conference, in a presentation that I will give on the 18th of March as a MOAC seminars for swaps. So I will show that. And so two kind of phenomena.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder if the more intelligent ones are there because the little ones are eggs and babies that they're, cradling along. I mean, but you guys both know this. I mean, there's a famous physicist from over 100 plus years ago, Boltzmann, who basically postulated the idea of organized plasma as intelligence, that, way back at the beginning of the universe, nearly every organizational structure was possibly made, and he called them and they were eventually termed Boltzmann brains. That if all it took would be one or two of them to stay compacted, as you say, and then learn how to make copies of themselves, and you could have had intelligence from the very beginning of the universe.
This is a possibility. You cited exactly what I wanted to say, because it connects directly with the work by Russian and German scientists, Morphil and Zitovich and others. They did a computer simulation of plasmas that are interacting with dust. Okay, what happens? It happens that when there is this interaction, the dust form spiral shapes absolutely identical to the DNA, which has not only the same shape, but also the characteristic of evolving, of multiplying, okay? There is this work published on New Journal of Physics, peer review, good level journal. There is the work by David Bohm, physicist, about plasmas, his PhD thesis. Plasma behave like only one entity. And there is my hypothesis that is coming from the theory by Penrose Hameroff of the quantum brain, that assume that if the particles of the plasma, ions and electrons, behave like microtubules in the brain, if there is a sufficient quantum and coherence without decoherence inside this plasma, that could work like a brain, literally, and also evolve and also react even to a light stimulation. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about that, and I elaborated the theory, which I published in a strange book, which I published 10 years ago.
Very interesting. Clearly on the front lines of exploring what intelligence can be, not just biological as we might imagine it, but something at another level. We have to close up now. I want to honor the time of all three panelists. Thank you so much. Before we let you go, though,
Thank you.
I want to know what you want to see happen in 2026. Here we are at the beginning of the year. What would be one thing that could materially advance our understanding, data collection, assessment, machine learning analysis of this phenomenon?
Well, I'm hoping that one of the defense contractors is going to say, hey, we want to be first out and we're giving you this craft to learn from. And like that they transparently take the lead in informing the public.
I want one of them to make a mistake in interpreting what Trump said and accidentally release more information than somebody else might think is appropriate.
The power of fear, Beatrice, the obstacle of fear and the power of potential fear of the administration coming after you.
Well, that's a good point.
I like both those thoughts. Massimo?
Yeah.
I want to be able to measure a magnetic field of the strength of 100 Tesla and see this from the splitting of Zeeman effect in a spectrum, and then demonstrate I am observing a plasma sheet which is confined by a strong magnetic field which acts like a thruster, and demonstrate that I'm like the Red Baron, you know that. But so I like, it's good to dream. Okay, we scientists are exactly like children, and we have to remain children up to the end of our life, always asking why and how.
Mm-hmm. And being open to the answers.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to being wrong. I love sitting with scientists. I don't know why. I'm of course not one, but I just love the spirit, and that ethos, Massimo, is so intrinsic to what it means to be alive, to be open till the end, and to inquire, and to do so on behalf of the collective interest, not necessarily. I'm sure there's a lot of scientists out there for their personal interest, but there is an ethos that guides the whole. So very much respect all three of your work and your contributions to the field. Thank you from UAP Med and from the team at Human Institute. I wonder, just as a closing thought, if a new field of science that has the need to generate findings and to publish them needs a new journal. Does there need to be a new journal, The Science of Non-Human Intelligence, in order to encapsulate this effort? Or, is the current scientific community capable of allowing?
I think the community would be okay if we could get archive to allow papers that, they allow a paper that counters the paper they wouldn't allow in, even though that paper was published eventually in a top journal. So I think a little bit more openness on the part of arXiv to be the actual scientists that they claim to be, and maybe an arXiv section that is curated by serious scientists like the people here, and is not immediately disallowing of papers. I think that would go a long way as well.
I would love that. Imagine like one that deals with the most exotic hypothesis in physics or and beyond.
Yeah.
Some way. Because it doesn't only have to be UAP, but because there are also other topics inside, like in cosmology, etc., where they ban certain.
Low energy nuclear reactions used to be one, but now everybody admits it's real. I know research going on at Stanford, MIT, NASA, etc. DARPA now, funds it. ARPA funds it. What once was off the table is now clearly on the table. Anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
Ted and I will close up with some final remarks. Thank you so much, Gary, Massimo, and Beatrice. Fascinating to host this conversation. And, as we come into contact with potential new layers of reality, science will have to respond and at least allow the inquiry. And if we can hope for anything from this moment with the administration potentially moving on this, maybe it allows that scientific inquiry to begin in earnest.
We can hope. And I've been in this field a long time, and I've been around scientists and engineers working on this underground. And I have to say that, the courage of our guests here is inspiring, to see people starting to step up and bring their chops, bring their skill set, and apply it without suffering real harm to their careers. And if anything, we can learn from that is that there's room for more. This is an interdisciplinary subject. We require support from all branches of science, really, social sciences and psychology down to physics and hard science. And there's room for everybody. And I'm just hoping that more people are inspired to step forward and bring their skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, something tells me we might see that happen in the next 2 years. The chemistry of the environment will change. And because of these pioneers and forerunners who have carried the ball in the dark years of whether it's the dark years of legacy ufology or the semi-dim years, even since 2017, we might see some bright years ahead for the scientific engagement on this topic.
Certainly looks that way.
Well, Ted, it's been a pleasure, always is, hosting these with you. And I know Chuck is in the background, the coordinator of the series Investigating NHI. I want to thank the team, Mariah, Kelvin, who are also in the background. And let's put up on screen the slide deck I have here just to quickly look at the 8-part series that we are endeavoring through. We're already in the signs of intelligence part of the series, and we're going to be looking at consciousness and cognitive frontiers, and then moving into communication and contact. And we have some great speakers lined up for the weeks and months ahead. Anything you'd like to say for UAP Med, or your, how the lay of the land looks to you, Ted, as we step into March 2026?
Well, sure. I've been working in nuts and bolts for a long time in the aviation field, working with NARCAP and later with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. But the work at UAP Med was really from the heart, because I'm an experiencer first. I wouldn't be involved with this field if I didn't have direct experience, if I hadn't seen phenomena myself. And the job has been to hold that true skeptic ground that says, don't come to conclusions until you have good reasons to. Stay open, basic scientific perspective. I'm hoping as things develop that experiencers are going to get more attention, that they're going to be considered more useful in the evidentiary perspective, and that society will start adapting to take care of them, along with science trying to understand how these things do what they do we can start looking at the effects these things have on individuals, their families, and their communities. So that's kind of my goal, is to make sure that moves in parallel with this scientific engagement.
Excellent. Yes. Well, if this is a science of sentient interaction, then the experience is central to the new data set of the new science. And so I know there's a great need to engage experiencers. And also, I'll just say that it's not been a hospitable environment for anyone who's had an experience that's not neutral or positive to come forward. And so we don't really know yet the nature of what the collective experience has been. I know
That's right.
some would kind of claim out of the gate that it's been majority positive based on one or two studies, probably not very well executed ones. We do not know. And so these are the new frontiers of our interaction with the unknown. And there may be attempts to obfuscate, to data denial, our ability to understand the true nature of the interaction. So much important work needed. I know this series and our work together, Ted, is very much about exploring those depths. We wanted to start with the scientific foundations and then move inward from there, and keep the conversation credible and grounded in data. And, to Gary's points, as Gary has so often talked about, how, data becomes evidence in the context of hypothesis.
Mhm.
Well, we need to begin to devise hypotheses now and look to the data we already have, and not expect that a data dump from any administration, any foreign government, or any other source is going to solve this riddle for us. In my view, we have not used the data we have sufficiently well enough in the context of intelligent hypotheses to generate an assessment of evidence.
Agreed. And as time goes on, I think we'll get closer to that. The issue with these kinds of exposures is, I think it has an urgency to it. We have first responders and mental health people and medical people, as well as the witnesses themselves, don't have the guidance they need, or the support they need, or the protection they need. So we need to learn as much as we can, as soon as we can, about this in order to take those next steps.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ted. Well, folks, thanks for hanging in there. And I hope today brought forward some insight and new dimensions to the scientific nature of what it means to investigate NHI. I have up on screen here some ways that you can be engaged and involved. You can look at the upcoming schedule by scanning the QR code. Like, subscribe, share, get others into this journey of exploration and investigation. If you're an interested speaker, submit an abstract. Or if you know of a potential candidate speaker, please reach out. Ted, myself, Chuck, the team are always reviewing new submissions and looking for people who can speak to their methods and the data that they are generating and the potential findings that are coming from that on the topic of NHI. And with that, we'll say goodnight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next lecture or panel of the Investigating NHI series.